Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening for our first Trinity U of our school year. We are so privileged to have Dr. Phillips speak to us this evening, and we are grateful that you are here tonight and we can learn together. I'm going to pray for us, and then Mr. Ramquist, who is the director of our Trinity U, will share a word about the purpose of this evening and why we do these nights for our community, as well as talk about a few other things related to Trinity U and our podcasts. So let me pray for us. Heavenly Father, I just thank you and praise you for the opportunity this evening to come together as a community and learn about you, your kingdom, your creation, and where we fit in all of that as your people. We just thank you and praise you, Lord, for what you continue to do through your community here at Trinity. It is a privilege to be a part of serving the next generation. We do not take lightly our call to help raise them up to seek a life of virtue, wisdom, purpose, and courage. May we do that as well as the grown-ups on this journey with our children. And we thank you so much for our community. And we pray your blessings upon this evening and open our ears and hearts to what you have for us. And bless Dr. Phillips. And thank you for his good mind and heart and graciousness in sharing with us this evening. Amen. Mr. Ramquist. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, welcome to you all. Thank you for coming out on this Monday night to our first of this year's Trinity U lectures. This is our third year offering these lectures. And the goal of Trinity U overall is to open the riches of classical education to our Trinity community. Many of us, myself included, didn't have the benefit of getting a classical education. And when I hear what other teachers are doing here at Trinity, I get really excited. I know a number of parents say they wish they had a chance to get this kind of education. And so Trinity U is our way of just opening up the door a little bit so you can peek in, so you can get a little bit of the goodness that happens every day here on this campus. To that end, we've not only been doing these lectures, but this year we started up another way to get access to some of this classical education background and information, and that's our podcast, the Classical Academy podcast. By show of hands, anyone listened to any of those episodes so far? Okay, a few of us have. The goal of the podcast in particular is to be a friendly guide to the world of classical education. Classical education, some of us might not know very much. It can seem intimidating sometimes, so we have a great host, our own Dr. Keith Bueller, who's a lot of fun, and we interview people in our community about what they're doing. They're not very long. The episodes are about 20 minutes. The first episode was our own Mrs. Caddo, who is talking about the secret history of the origins of Trinity. Our second episode that dropped just a few weeks ago was with the Carty family, Mr. and Mrs. Carty, who are our STEM power couple here at Trinity, and the question about how does STEM and classical education work together. So if you haven't heard them yet, you can find them really easily on our school's website or at Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. They're very easy to access and listen to. Our podcasts drop monthly. Our next one up is with our Dr. Andrew Selby, and he's going to be talking about who killed classical education. It came back to life, don't worry, but the question is what happened with that? Where did it all go and how did it come back? So if you like the podcast, please subscribe. Please share with people that you know that are interested in what we're doing here at Trinity or want to learn more. It's a great way to let a neighbor or a friend get a first taste of what classical education is all about. On to tonight. I'm really excited that we get Dr. Mark Phillips here to share a little bit about what he does with his students in the classroom. Dr. Phillips has had a long journey to get to classical education. He was just telling me he started off as an animal surgeon and then found his way into the comedy club circuit where he opened for Steve Martin at one time at least. He then ended up pastoring a few churches, went over to Oxford to get a PhD, because why not? And has ended up here at Trinity, teaching and chairing our Department of Theology and Science. This is his 8th year teaching here and repeatedly comes up at the top of the list of our students' favorite teachers. So I'm thrilled that he gets to share something from what he does with our Trinity students with you all tonight. So please welcome with me Dr. Mark Phillips.
Very, very gracious, thank you. Let's see if we're working here. We're not. Pointer works. Trinity U, Trinity U, Trinity U, Trinity U. It's not much of a lecture. I think we have some technical people getting back there. While they're fixing that, very short story. Once upon a time, there was a postmodern man who broke his arm raking leaves. And you say, how could that have happened? Well, he was a postmodern man. Postmodern people don't believe in absolute truth. Therefore, how to use instruments and tools is difficult for the postmodern mind. And he broke his arm raking leaves when he fell out of the tree. There's another once upon a time that the Bible begins with, and it says, in the beginning. Now, Christians and everyone in the Western world, and many outside of the Western world, are very familiar with that first verse. We're so familiar with it, we're jaded as to how remarkable that is in an ancient text, because most ancient texts don't even believe in a beginning. So already from the very first verse, the Bible is unique in its cosmology, in some of its predictions it makes. And we're going to look at some of those tonight. And in so doing, we're going to look at two of the greatest discoveries of the 20th century, and one of them still greatly unfolding in this century, and how they corroborate the existence of the God of the Bible. Now, the reason you're here, some of the PTA people are here because I went in and spoke and said, if we really want God's favor in Game 5, yeah, you get it. So this is the famous apologetics line out of the Bible from 2 Peter. In your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy. Now, when we're honoring him as holy, that means we really want to revere his command to go into all the world and share the good news. And that's why it follows. Regard him as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason. That word reason is apologion in the Greek, and that's where we get the word apologetics. It doesn't mean we're apologizing. It means we're giving a defense, a reason for the faith. To give a reason for the hope that is in you, and then we must always remember this, yet do it with gentleness and respect. You know, don't like open with postmodern jokes and stuff. So these are the two great conclusions. The universe had a beginning, already mentioned that. We'll talk about the significance of that and how that is now well corroborated in the scientific evidence. And also that creation is designed, the cosmos and the life systems, as we have started to unwind the fabric within the cell. Personally, I'm not sure Darwin today would be a neo-Darwinist. I'm dead serious when I say that. The cell to him was a black box. It was just gel. It was goo. If he knew the remarkable nanoengineering inside the workings of the cell now, I don't think he would hold to his theory. So these are six, the six main claims the Bible makes. That the whole universe was created out of nothing. Everyone's familiar with that. People who aren't even familiar with John 3:16 have heard of Genesis 1:1. The whole universe is in entropy. We'll talk about what that means. It basically means it's growing colder and colder, losing its energy onto what's called universal death. Don't worry, that's good news. It sounds bad, doesn't it? The whole universe is expanding. The Bible made that prediction. I'll show you the scriptures. You'll be blown away. God's laws are constant, fixed, and reliable. Only the Bible of an ancient text says that. There is a fixed amount of created mass and energy. We now know this is true. And then finally, the universe is fine-tuned by a designer to make human life possible here on Earth. So let's just look at some of these texts, first of all, and compare them. So there's the main one everybody knows about. There are others, especially in Job. When you're reading through Job, look for creation statements. The Bible alone, as an ancient text, says the universe was created out of nothing. I just put a few comparisons. Lucretius, who had actually got many, many things right, and they studied Lucretius here. Lucretius got a lot right, but he did say nothing ever springs miraculously from nothing. All are formed from fixed seeds. Now, that idea of seed is actually well rooted in Greek philosophy, the logos spermatikos. So when a Greek read, in the beginning was the word, he's reading in the beginning, in archaios logos. A Greek took notice when John wrote that. Cyclical view of time, creation over and over and over and over. That's Hinduism, which is reflected in the reincarnation cycle of Hinduism. Here's the Enuma Ilish creation myth. Here's how it opens. Only two beings exist in unformed creation. In other words, stuff is already there. There's Apsu, the fresh waters, and his wife Tiamat, who's the salt water in the chaotic oceans. So some people see similarity to Enuma Ilish in the second verse of the Bible, which talks about the Spirit hovering over the waters, but there's no comparison at all. That's a very accurate description. Genesis 1:2 is a very accurate description of primordial earth. And if we have time during the Q&A, we'll talk about that. So that's just to give you a little comparison. Now, here's another prediction the Bible makes. Okay, there's the second one. The whole universe is in entropy, leading to its end. In other words, entropy is the fact that the universe is running out of energy. The primary mass of the universe are the stars, right? Because they're the biggest things out there. They're primarily these big plasma balls of hydrogen fuel going through nuclear fusion, which our chemistry students will actually be testing on Wednesday and Thursday, for which they are very excited. The sun is giving of itself to give light to Earth. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? The sun is giving of itself to give light on Earth. It gives up 500 to 600 metric tons per second of helium being formed from hydrogen fusion. And then other heavier elements are formed as well. But from that comes radiation, and especially visible light, which drives photosynthesis and starts the food chain here on Earth. So a beautiful symbol is the sun, and God created it as a beautiful symbol. Dying, giving of itself so that we can have physical life here, just as Jesus gave his own physical life on the cross so that we can have eternal life. Beautiful, beautiful story that God paints. But here's some others. The creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. Talking about the fact that the universe is dying. Now, Paul was a smart guy, but he was not an astrophysicist or a quantum physicist. He did not realize the full scientific measure of what he was writing there. 2 Peter talks about the end of the universe as well. Well, that day will bring about the destruction of the heavens by fire, and the elements will melt in the heat. That word elements is stoicheia. That's where we get stoichiometry in chemistry, what most students consider the hardest part of chemistry. It's always fun to teach that as they groan. And then Revelation 21:1, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and first earth had passed away. The Bible alone predicts the universe is on course to death. And it gets very specific, as you can see in the Romans passage, it gets very specific. Now, another passage, the whole universe is expanding. Look at these specific scriptures, and there are a lot more. I just put up a few. God alone spreads out the heavens. God stretches out the skies like a tent curtain. a perfect description of the expansion of the universe. We know from Einstein's space-time theorems there is a fabric to space and is blowing up like a balloon and expanding. Perfect description. God stretches out the skies like a tent curtain. The one who created the sky and stretched it out. The Lord, he who stretches out the heavens. These are specific predictions about God expanding the universe, and that's exactly what we witness now. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. So, what the students learn, now we're into the classroom here, is surge. Surge is a great memory tool to prove the universe had a beginning, that the universe is expanding, that the universe is in entropy, pointing to the fact that the universe had to have a beginning. So follow. And by the end of this, you will see, wow, the universe had to have a beginning. And probably already, I hope, you're realizing what a big deal that is. Because if the universe once was not, and then it is, think about it. We'll get to it. Surge is a memory tool for these observations about the universe. The second law of thermodynamics, that's the one that tells us the universe is getting colder. It's on its way to cold death. And you're like, that's supposed to be good news? Well, let me ask you a question. If the universe is on its way to cold death, why hasn't that happened yet? And there's usually a pause like this in the classroom also. Only we're closer, and I'm eyeing each one of them, and it's great. And they're growing new dendrites as they think, and are getting this information. If the universe is on track to cold death, that is, all the energy dissipates, all the fuel dissipates, no more light, no more heat, no more usable energy is what entropy really means. Energy can't transfer from one body to another anymore, and so it reaches cold death around 2 or 3 degrees Kelvin. Why haven't we reached cold death of the universe yet? It's as easy as it sounds. Hasn't been enough what? Time. You putting 2 and 2 together yet? If the universe had existed forever, that would have been enough time, wouldn't it? You with me? Therefore, obviously we haven't reached cold death because we're in here talking about it tonight. Therefore, the universe hasn't existed forever. And if it hasn't existed forever, it had to come into existence. And it's called the Kalam cosmological argument, which our 9th graders just learned about and tested on and did very well. And it's a very simple statement. Anything that comes into existence must have a cause. The universe came into existence. The universe has a boom. Physicists themselves call it the great causal agent. Physicists in papers, in journals, in peer-reviewed journals, talk about the fact that there needs to be some kind of causal agent. Sometimes they'll even slip in a capital A on agent. Usually get in trouble for it, but we appreciate them trying. Now, universal expansion is one of those things that points to the fact that the universe had a beginning. We now know the universe is expanding thanks to the work of Edwin Hubble just south of here at Mount Wilson Palomar Observatory. Wherever he looked into the sky, what we once thought were just specks, maybe small or distant stars, turned out to be galaxies, billions and billions of galaxies. And they all had a shift in light. They all had what came to be known as the redshift. Light acts like sound with the Doppler effect. Y'all know the Doppler effect, yes? Something's approaching. Do you like it? These are sound waves, and as it's moving away from you, they're stretching out. And And by stretching out, they're getting lower and lower and lower. That's the Doppler effect. We hear it when somebody lays on their horn because they're obnoxious or they're just an ordinary California driver, right? And we're standing there. We hear the Doppler effect from our perspective. We're standing at the road watching the average California driver who has a little fish on his car. I love Jesus. No. It's like, dude, take that off your car. Okay. So light does the same thing. So wherever we look in the sky at these distant galaxies, there's a redshift, meaning they are moving away from us faster than we are expanding. And therefore it proves the universe is in motion and expanding. This was huge. This was huge because if the universe is expanding, how big would it be if it had been here an infinite amount of time? Infinitely large. It is large, but not infinitely large. It doesn't end there. Let's go backwards in time. You ready? This is what Stephen Hawking did in his PhD work with his Oxford. He was at Cambridge, but his supervisor, his thesis advisor, was from Oxford, Penrose. And Penrose and Hawking came up with this reality. If the universe has mass, and it does have mass. Everybody knows that. You know it even more at Christmas, right? You look down, my mass is growing. So if the universe has mass and relativity accurately describes the universe, and it is expanding, it must have a beginning. Because if we go backwards in time, what happens? Contraction, 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 down to, boom, that infinitesimal singularity. And then the 1 second before that, nothing. So you can either expand infinitely, then we'd be infinitely large, we're not, or go backwards in time and nothing, because eventually you reach that infinitesimal singularity before the great inflationary Big Bang. There was nothing there. If there was a Big Bang, there had to be a Big Banger, right? So universal expansion is huge. That later informed Einstein as well. We'll talk about him. R, radiation background. If this great expansion of the universe began at that infinitesimal singularity, then when atoms started to form, and by the way, think about this. Pure energy in this infinitesimal singularity probably weighs about 16 sextillion tons, right? And then it expands, this pure energy starts to cool off and slow down, and immediately mass starts forming, and these things are all relational and start forming atoms. They say, hey, let's get together. Think about the fact that one of the first things that happens in creation is that the particles are starting to be in relationship with each other. The divine, sacred romance of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit in perfect relationship. And God creates, and immediately the universe starts displaying his relational character, leading up to the pinnacle of creation, Imago Dei, human beings with whom he wants this relationship. The whole universe talks about this relationship. The skies proclaim the handiwork of his hands. Psalm 19:1. Because God is a relational being. And the very first thing that happens is atoms start coming into relationship with each other. Well, when they did, they created microwaves. That was the theory for a long time. And so they said, well, if the universe had a beginning, we should be able to find these microwave radiation background noise wherever we look. And then lo and behold, a couple of guys named Penzias and Wilson in the mid-1960s working in the Bell Laboratories in New Jersey, of all places, they had a satellite microphone that they were trying to fine-tune so they could get better signals from satellites. And they were like, who knows, maybe someday we'll even be watching TV from satellites. You've got to be kidding, right? Right now they're watching us from satellites. But so Penzias and Wilson, wherever they turn their microphone, they hadn't heard of the cosmic background radiation microwave discussion. But a friend of theirs had, and they were at lunch and said, oh man, we can't get this thing fine-tuned. There's this noise we can't clear up. And their friend over there just jaw dropped. I'm like, dude, what's wrong? He says, you have made the discovery of the century. You found CBR. And they're like, who's CBR? He said, no, you found the cosmic background radiation, and then explained it to them. And they talked to some astrophysicists, and sure enough, they rushed into this Bell Lab, and sure enough, cosmic background radiation discovered. Boom, more evidence that the universe had a beginning. Now, when galaxies form, galaxies are coming out of energy into large masses, right? Galaxies are big things, a lot of mass in there. Well, when they're forming, it's kind of like throwing a pebble into a very still pond. There are going to be ripples that come out into this background radiation. And they're called gravitational seeds or gravitational galaxy ripples. And for a long time, they're like, they should be out there. They should be out there. And finally, in the late 1980s and early 90s, we sent up the COBE Explorer, which was specifically for Cosmic Background Explorer, going to look for ripples in the cosmic background in areas where galaxies had formed, and sure enough, they found them. Physicists, even those like Stephen Hawking, who kind of drifted at the end of his life, but he said it's like looking into the face of God, because they realized this is the final nail in the coffin of the static universe theory, that it's always been here. We now know, due to entropy and the time problem, you can't get away from the constraints of infinite time. Universal expansion, it's not infinitely large. We go backwards in time, it shrinks to nothingness. The radiation background discovered in the 60s and the late 80s and 90s, ripples in that background where galaxies are forming, that did it. But way back in the 19-teens and 1920s, a young physicist by the name of Albert Einstein had come up with the theory of relativity, which, by the way, is now proven to further precision than Newton's laws of motion. So we either have to quit calling it the theory of relativity or start calling it Newton's theories of motion. And nobody's going to do that because those are pretty well-proven laws. Laws, by the way, are just observations we make. The law of gravity, it's not this thing. It's how we describe what happens when masses get together. Einstein, in his space-time theorems, that's where he created this space fabric and said that when there's a large heavenly body, large moon, large planet, especially the stars, they like indent into this fabric like when you sit on a trampoline or something. And then other local bodies are caught in that wave. That's how gravity works. Gravity is just our way of describing what we observe. And so Einstein reached a disturbing conclusion when he finished his theorems. He said, wow, my theorems say the universe is expanding. This is long before these other discoveries. It's just E comes last in surge. I didn't want them to memorize, say, erg. You know, maybe could have, or E-surg or something. So Einstein really should be first. But Einstein reached this conclusion. He did not like his conclusion because he said, whoa, whoa, whoa. This means the universe had to have a beginning, and I don't want to buy that. I'm a static universe guy. And so he created this constant called the Einstein Constant. He threw it into all of his equations to try to fix them so that the universe could be static. And it looked like it was, yeah, there's some expansion, but then my constant allows it to contract again and expand and contract, expand and contract. Then Edwin Hubble gave him a call from the West Coast and said, Al, you need to come visit me. I got something to show you. And he comes, he gets with Hubble, he looks at the data, he's convinced the redshift shows the expanding universe. His original equations before he tried to fix them displayed what they measured in these redshift matched exactly his equations. And there's a famous quip where he comes out and the press is waiting to hear. Hubble and Einstein have gotten together. Hubble, whose expansion says there must be a beginning of the universe, and Einstein, who doesn't want to go there. And Einstein comes out and they say, well, Dr. Einstein, what do you think? He says, I now see the necessity for a beginning. And that was it. It was done. I mean, Al said it. And then all this other stuff followed throughout the 20th century. And so we now know that the universe did indeed have a beginning. So Fang Lizi was a famous Chinese astrophysicist, most likely an atheist. You kind of have to be if you're a famous Chinese astrophysicist and you want to live a full life, out of prison, with your head intact. And so he said a question that has always been considered a topic of metaphysics or theology. The creation of the universe has now become an area of active research in physics. He admitted it. There's a beginning to the universe. We atheists are got to get busy and try to come up with some naturalistic way to explain that everything came from nothing, even though God created everything from nothing in such a way that no thing can come from nothing. We can't create anything out of nothing, yet that is exactly what God did. The very first act within nature was itself a miracle. So when somebody says to you, I don't believe in the Bible because it has miracle stories, and I don't believe in miracles, and you say, oh man, that's so disappointing. I thought the universe was real. And they go, what do you mean? Well, the universe is a miracle. Well, what do you mean? Well, let me show you. And then you go into Surge and you explain it to them and they get baptized the next day. and they're like, what convinced you? Surge. Surge. Who's Surge, right? So here's finally he recognized being a very, very honest guy. Now, there are a lot of astrophysicists who have come to faith within the last half century, especially the last 20 years, when it's really been verified that not only did the universe have a beginning, therefore a beginner, but it's very fine-tuned, right? So let's just look at some of the other. Okay, so here's Vilenkin, right? Famous astrophysicist. He's not a self-proclaimed Christian. The cosmos, can't possibly be eternal in the past. There must be some kind of boundary. Any universe that on average expands must have a beginning. Bourdieu, Vilenkin, Guth. Vilenkin recently wrote a book called The Universe Without a Beginning. They're trying, and if we have time during Q&A, we'll talk about some of their theories. And they're kind of like breaking your arm while raking, but we'll look at some. And there. So there's our great conclusion number one. The universe had a beginning. So, come on, gang. What is the main theological, philosophical implication of this? Anyone, you want to get a good classroom culture grade. What's the implication of a beginning? Yes, sir. Yes, there had to be a beginning. Well, who created God? No one. God did not come into existence. That's why he named himself I am, not I do. You ever thought about that? He doesn't say you're a human doing. You're a human being because you're made in my image. You are because I created you as such. God has always been, and that's why he answered Moses, who shall I say? Send them, tell them, I am that I am sent you. Because he has always been. And even that's difficult, because always is a time term. Right? That's why he just left time out of his answer. I am. So, obviously, here are the other claims of the Bible that we mentioned. God's laws are constant. They're fixed. They're reliable. Look at Jeremiah. This is when God is promising Israel, look, you're having a tough time right now. I'm allowing you to be disciplined by your enemies because you've been naughty boys and girls, right? But take heart. This is what the Lord says. If I have not made my covenant with day and night and established the laws of heaven and earth, he goes on to say, then I won't keep my promises with you. But in other words, I have created fixed laws of the universe. Early scientists were Christians, and they read that passage, and the lights went on. God says the universe has fixed laws. Of course it does. He's unchangeable. He is immutable, what theologians call the immutability of God. That's why it's so beautiful to have a relationship with him. When you get saved, he knows your past, present, and future, right? He's unchangeable. We break the covenant all the time, but he keeps it because he's unchangeable. If he changed, he would no longer be perfect. Or if he needed to change to be perfect, he wasn't perfect before the change, and perfection means forever perfect. So, because God is unchangeable, he created a universe, and he created these laws that are also unchangeable. And early scientists started realizing we can study the universe and learn about it, and if we repeat the same experiment under the same conditions over and over and over, we will get the same results because God is a reliable God who has created a reliable universe. It says so right there, and sure enough, that's what any scientist, secular, Christian, atheist, Muslim, they'll tell you these laws are fixed laws because that's the way God created them, reflecting his character. The universe always reflects his character. There's a fixed amount of created mass and energy. That's true. Probably somewhere along the line of 10 to the 78th power to 10 to the 82nd power number of atoms in the universe. And our chemistry students learn how to calculate that number. How do we derive that number? Based on the mass of the sun and stoichiometry and dividing the mass of hydrogen, which is the majority percentage of the sun, into the mass of the sun, times the same number of stars, average size star, times the number of galaxies, blah, blah, blah. You get to 10 to the 78th to 10 to the 82nd atoms in the universe, a fixed number. All the other ancient texts talk about matter constantly being created. God's done making mass. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. He's not done working. Let us not be dismayed. He's simply done with his work of creation. There is a fixed amount of mass and energy, and that's exactly what any calculation of astrophysics points to. There's a fixed amount of mass and energy. Now, mass can turn into energy, and energy can turn back into mass. That's the famous mass energy equivalency equation of Einstein, right? But you're not going to create new energy out of nothing or new mass out of nothing. Only God can do that, and he did it once when he created the universe and specially created all the life forms. Amazing predictions of the Bible that are borne out in the truth of science, where science is true. Oh, we have another situation that may work better. Here we go. We're so excited. Let's see. Yeah. All right. So here's conclusion number 2. So everybody convinced the universe had a beginning, therefore it had to have a beginner. If there was a big bang, there was a big banger, right? If there was an infinitesimal singularity, there had to be someone who created that infinitesimal singularity. Did not come out of quantum gravity because gravity didn't exist because gravity has to have mass to operate. You're going to hear the latest theories. Well, it came from quantum gravity. No, gravity needs mass. There was no mass. The universe didn't exist. It can't create itself because it wasn't an it to be it in the first place to create itself. Come on. So here's the other deal. If something clearly appears designed, then it's designed. I mean, let's stop being silly. One of the discoverers of the structure of DNA said, I must constantly remind my students, life systems are not designed. Life systems are not designed. Now today I'm going to show you the Krebs cycle, but life systems are not designed. Today I'm going to show you the 25-step process of blood clotting, but life systems are not designed. Today we're going to look at the coding of DNA, but life systems are not designed. Life systems are not designed. Do you understand? Yes, life systems are not designed. The design of this, don't call it that. I mean, the accidental, random coming together of these 100 things that look like a miracle are not designed. You've got it, right? So the universe clearly appears it is designed. So the universe is designed, and we're just going to touch on some of the things. The fundamental forces of matter. There are numerous fundamental forces, but four major ones: gravity, electromagnetic force, and then the strong and weak nuclear forces. That's what holds protons and neutrons together in the nucleus of an atom, right? They have to be perfectly fine-tuned, or else no stuff. And no stuff, no life. We wouldn't be sitting here talking about it. We have to be at the perfect point in universal history, the expansion rate compared to gravity. Gravity's trying to pull the universe back together. We call it dark matter. I call it the hand of God, but we call it dark matter is causing the universe to expand. They have to be in perfect balance together in order to have just the right expansion rate, just the right cooling rate for life to be here on planet Earth in this Milky Way galaxy. We have to be in a perfect galaxy. They're not all the same. Our galaxy they're a lot like ours, but it's not the majority. But you also have to be the perfect location in that galaxy. Most galaxies are space dust. If you're around a bunch of space dust, you're going to die from radiation. You have to be in a clear band of the spiral galaxy in order for there to be life. And what does that clear band allow those Imago Dei creatures to do? Allows them to look out and learn about the rest of the universe. The very conditions necessary for life are the same conditions that allow us to observe the rest of the universe, which is why Albert Einstein said, the most incomprehensible thing about the universe to me is that it is comprehensible. He knew exactly what he was saying. He knew you had to have the perfect systems for life, and those perfect systems for life here on planet Earth allow us to see the rest of the universe and learn about the God who created it. You have to have the perfect size, age of star. It has to put out the perfect amount of radiation. It has to put out that thin band of visible light to drive photosynthesis and start the food chain. Perfect planet. You have to have a bioplanet with the right amount of water and land mass. And it's got to be in perfect rotation and distance of this perfect star. You're going to have a perfect moon around this perfect Earth. And by the way, that perfect star is going to also emit some deadly radiation. Therefore, your perfect planet has to have a liquid ion core spinning around, creating a magnetic radiation belt to absorb harmful radiation coming in. Whoa, look at these coincidences. And then finally, we have to have that perfect large outer planet. Who's our large outer planet? Jupiter. Why is Jupiter there? Yes, ma'am. You're in my class. You're cheating. But I'm so glad that you raised your hand and know the answer. Let me give thanks to God for a minute. Okay. So, yeah, why is Jupiter there? Yes. Between the sun and Jupiter lies Earth. And they catch all that space debris. Now, sometimes it slips through. We've had what are called extinction events in the history of the planet, but not since human beings have been here. Gee, what a coincidence. So those are just a few of the things. Now, let's look specifically. The gravitational constant. When we say it's fine-tuned, we're talking about the precision. All right, so like you take a millimeter, that's 1/1000th of a meter, and you keep cutting it and cutting it and cutting it. So that'd be like 10 to the -3, and then you go down 10 to the -6, 10 to the -9, right? And you go all the way down to pico, nanometers, and picometers, and femtometers. You're getting really tiny, That's the fine-tuning of these constants. They've been calculated by astrophysicists. Gravitational constant, that is the pull of gravity, is fine-tuned 10 to the 34th power. Holy moly, come on, God. Electromagnetic force versus the force of gravity, right? So they have to be perfectly balanced or it's going to mess everything up. And we're not going to have the atoms that we have and the elements that we have which allow for life. The cosmological constant, that's the expansion constant that controls the expansion rate of the universe. 10 to the 120th power. The most fine-tuned precision instrument we have made here on Earth is the gravitational wave telescope built by Caltech and MIT physicists and astrophysicists. And it's pretty fine-tuned. It's fine-tuned 10 to the 23rd power. Quite a remarkable achievement for humankind. But just compare it to the cosmological constant. 10 to the 97th power less accurate, right? So that means that whoever created the cosmological constant is 10 to the 97th power at least more intelligent than the Caltech and MIT physicists. And that much better funded than the federal government, which I guess isn't saying much anymore. Mass density of the universe. Listen, the amount of density in the universe has to be perfectly fine-tuned. Since it's expanding, and we take it back to that infinitesimal singularity, if it was off by 1 part in 10 to the 59, right? That's 59 zeros. 1 part in 59 zeros, boom, nothing. That means either gravity is going to be too strong and it's going to collapse back in before it ever gets started, or the expansion rate will be too fast. It would make chemistry really easy because you'd only have 2 elements, hydrogen and helium. But you wouldn't be able to teach it because you didn't have any other elements to be yourself to teach it. All right? So the expansion rate of the universe, 1 part in 10 to the 55. Look at initial entropy. In other words, as soon as the universe starts this expansion, it has to be fine-tuned to start cooling off to prepare the perfect galaxy for this perfect planet in the perfect location of that perfect galaxy around that perfect star in the perfect orbit around it with its perfect moon and its perfect liquid iron core and the perfect large. All that stuff had to be in that initial entropy, and it's 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 123. Get down, mama, that's impossible. And those are just a few of the fine-tuning requirements of the cosmos. And that's why you have astrophysicists saying things like this. As we look out into the universe and identify the many accidents of physics, I mean, seriously, guys, stop. That's like raking out of the tree. We look at the many accidents of physics. They could have at least put in quotations or something. But we look at the many accidents of physics and astronomy that have worked together to our benefit, in other words, so that we can exist. It almost seems as if, why, the universe must in some sense have known we were coming. And they're like shocked, and Christians are like, yeah, right? There's some others. This guy's a Nobel laureate, right? Intelligent design. There's a movement within science right now, and it is growing, let me tell you. I belong to a private Google group. It has to be private because many of the professors in it are at very unfriendly institutions with this idea of intelligent design, a designer behind everything. But this guy came out boldly. I mean, after all, he won the Nobel Prize. He can say whatever he wants now. Intelligent design, as one sees it from a scientific point of view, seems to be quite real. This is a very special universe. It's remarkable that it came out just this way. If the laws of physics weren't just the way they are, we couldn't be here at all. The sun couldn't be there. The laws of gravity and nuclear laws and magnetic theory, quantum mechanics, and so on have to be just the way they are for us to be here, right? Hugh Ross, astrophysicist, astronomers who do not draw theistic or deistic conclusions are becoming rare. This is exciting times we are in, right? These are exciting times. And even the few dissenters, those who are resisting that there's a God behind this, hint that the tide is against them. Geoffrey Burbridge of University of California at San Diego complains that his fellow astronomers are rushing off to join the first Church of Christ of the Big Bang. Let me tell you, astrophysicists are coming into the church. There is a church near Caltech where they have a huge Sunday school every Sunday being taught by different astrophysicists either at Caltech or associated with it. It's amazing what's going on. And I'm not seeing it in the mainstream news. That's weird. Penzias, remember Penzias Wilson? This is the guy who discovered cosmic background radiation without realizing he discovered it until his friend told him he had discovered it, and then he won a Nobel Prize for it. I assume he thanked his friend in his speech. Astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe which was created out of nothing. Just thank you, Penzias, he's admitting it. And delicately balanced to provide exactly the conditions required to support life. In the absence of an absurdly improbable accident, the observations of modern science seem to suggest an underlying, one might say, supernatural plan. Oh, really? Could be. James Tour, this dude, he is at the front of his field, a leading nanochemist in the nanosystems within the cell, right? Like you have nanotechnology. He's observing nanotechnology within the cell. He was originally a chemist, now more of a molecular biologist. I build molecules for a living. I can't begin to tell you how difficult that job is. I stand in awe of God. He comes right out. Thank you, James, for being honest. I stand in awe of God because of what he has done through his creation. My faith has been increased through my research. Only a rookie who knows nothing about science would say science takes away from faith. If you really study science, it will bring you closer to God. And that's what we're doing here at Trinity. They're finishing here armed to the teeth with the scientific facts that support their faith, and they are prepared to give a reason for the hope that is within them to anyone who asks, including those professors who I hope they irritate to death. And get them saved. And then finally, very quickly, I want to rush through this because I want to take some time for Q&A. Very first thing they learn in biology is called the Central Dogma. Dogma is a fancy word for teaching. You have dogmatics in theology, teaching of theology. The Central Dogma is DNA codes for messenger RNA. Messenger RNA carries that code into the ribosomes and builds amino acids. That's the Central Dogma. The very first thing they learn is that Central Dogma. And this is a little section of a DNA strand. This is right here. You look at the A, G, C on one side. It's a helix. And those alphabet letters, A bonds with T, G bonds with C, they're within that helix. They carry the code to build amino acids into proteins. Now, repeat after me. Amino acids are like letters. Amino acids are like letters. Gee, what do you mean, Dr. Phillips? Well, amino acids have to be put in the perfect kind of sequence, just like letters do, for that protein to be functional. They have to be in perfect sequence, right? So if you look here, you got CG, AG, CTA. So that's a code within there. And that code is copied by messenger RNA and taken to another place in the cell called the ribosome, where messenger RNA meets up with transfer RNA, who's carrying enzymes, enzyme letters. And if they're not in perfect sequence, you're not going to have a functional protein. And without a functional protein, you don't have life. You take a cell, remove the water from it, 50% or more of the dry weight of the cell is protein. They are the building blocks of everything, and they are the workhorses of everything. Enzymes, hormones, all that, those are all proteins. Hemoglobin in your red blood cells, it carries oxygen to the cells and carbon dioxide away from them. That's a protein, right? And on and on and on it goes. All the enzymes at work are proteins. Without enzymes, you can't have the biochemical reactions that you have. So if you look at those letters, it's gibberish. They're not in the proper order. but when we put them in the proper order, they make sense. We read the sentence, God is the creator. Amino acids are the same way. You have this little machine here called RNA polymerase, and he's dragging messenger RNA there who's copying the code. Now there's messenger RNA, those colored, and see how that's bringing the amino acids into the ribosome? See how they're linking together, the amino acids? You're going to get to see this cycle a few times. As they're linking together, you're building a protein strand. Now watch this. Put your thinking caps on. RNA polymerase, when you see ACE, it's usually an enzyme. It's a protein. So it takes a protein to unwind the DNA helix. It takes a protein to unwind the DNA helix. But that protein cannot be built without the information inside the DNA helix. It takes a protein to unwind the DNA helix, RNA polymerase. But that protein cannot be built without the code inside the DNA. It takes a protein to unwind the DNA helix. But that protein cannot exist unless it's built through that sequencing, like right there, perfect sequence of amino acids. There's like 20. They're like letters. We have 26 letters in our alphabet. There's like 20 amino acids. They spell protein words. Average protein, 150 to 250 amino acids. That's a big word, isn't it? Some of them are thousands. And they have to be in the right sequence to function and work. But when we look at what's called transcription, writing, script, writing the code onto messenger RNA, when we look at that, we see that RNA polymerase right there is a protein. And without that thing, you can't copy the code, but you can't build that thing without the code. Without that thing, you can't copy the code. Are you getting it? But you can't build that thing without the code. Without that thing, you can't access the code. But you can't build that thing without accessing the code. Oh, my atheist ungoodness. Without that machine, I cannot access the code of DNA. But without accessing the code of DNA, I can't have that machine. We call that circular causality. Some of the proteins that are built by the code in DNA are the very proteins used to access the code in DNA. You can't have one without the other. DNA is not just going to all of a sudden appear on its own. Oh, where'd this programming come from and what's it for? Oh, it's to build proteins. Oh, well, let's get at that. We don't have any proteins. Oh, wait. How do we get that code out of that DNA? Well, we use these proteins. Cool. We don't have any proteins because we can't access the code without the proteins. Oh. And then they go and get baptized the next day. How do you like this one? Got this from Dr. Patrick, our speaker, this weekend. And he told me, no, it's not from me, it's from the Holy Spirit. I thought, okay, let's give credit where it's due. This sentence wrote itself. How nonsensical does that sound? Yeah. It's just a code of letters that have meaning. Let's just scratch through this sentence and replace it with DNA. DNA wrote itself. Difference is DNA is a much more complex code than that sentence. In fact, Bill Gates said this of DNA. It is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created. He doesn't even say it's a computer program. He says like one. It's far beyond. Computer programs are binary. DNA is quaternary. And you have these long strands of these codes, and they overlap with each other. And you have codes within the codes. And they build proteins that we now have learned carry more codes. And so protein RNA polymerase comes along, unwinds that helix. Messenger RNA comes in and copies it, goes to the ribosomes, builds a protein. Now another protein machine built by the code within the DNA comes along and takes that protein out of the ribosome, ushers it to another place in the cell called a Golgi Apparatus. And in the Golgi Apparatus, another machine comes along and folds that protein in the perfect shape that it needs to be, a globular shape, hence a globular protein, hemoglobin. And it folds it down, and another machine comes along and takes the perfectly folded protein, which has its own coded message it's going to send to somebody else, takes it to where it's needed in the cell or to some export places out of the cell where it's going to be ushered by another protein to another cell somewhere else and take the message with it. Wow, look what nature did on its own. Code within code within code, carrying codes. In fact, one of the big ideas of biology is that we now know living systems receive, store, transmit, and respond to information. That's one of the key 4 ideas of biology. They're also taught very early on in any biology course. It's just a lot of the courses don't stop to pause and say, wait a minute. If we're carrying a bunch of codes everywhere, there has to be a code writer. So during Darwin's time, Hutton and Lyell were a couple of historical geologists, and this is the end. They had this principle that they came up with. And they said the processes affecting Earth today are the same ones that affected it in the past. And this influenced Darwin's thinking, and in fact, it's influenced science. And so if we take a very scientific principle of Lyell and Hutton, which is really biblical, it's just saying the laws are fixed, laws of the universe are fixed. So whatever forces are operating today, they'd be operating it exactly the same way in the past under the same conditions, right? So the processes affecting Earth today are the same ones that affected it in the past. And so that begs the question, what is and has always been required for deliberation, for design, and for programming? What is required and what has always been required for any kind of deliberation, design, and programming. And by the way, this DNA programming we're talking about, they are in the simplest of cells, like bacteria, cyanobacteria, archaea. There's no such thing as a simple cell. There are just some cells that are simpler than others. But even the simple cells cannot live without coded proteins coming from genetic information. It had to be there from the start, programmed perfectly. And what has always been required for any kind of programming? Intelligence, a programmer. DNA is a programmed code, far more complex than any software ever created or imagined, said Bill Gates. Therefore, there's a great programmer behind the code of DNA. There's a great designer behind the design of the universe, which had a beginning pointing to a great beginner. Thank you.